Hello, dear friends. Reality is prevailing over monetary fantasy, and the old spell of magic paper or promissory notes without backing is losing its power. Opinion piece. Gold standard is unavoidable. No one can stop what is coming. Loss of confidence in paper money. Countries demanding payment in gold on the rise. The Vatican was the country with the most gold on the planet. The Austrian School of Economics defends gold. It predicted the current crisis with extraordinary accuracy. Spain ranks 20th in gold reserves. Metallism was the economic doctrine of the Spanish Empire. The Spanish gold doubloon was the world's most important currency. The Spanish piece of 8 was the first silver currency in the world's use. The piece of 8 was known in the Anglo-Saxon world as the Spanish dollar. A world system of free exchange would put an end to central banks. The dollar symbol has its origins in the Pillars of Hercules on the Spanish coat of arms. Let's start. The gold standard is not only possible but absolutely inevitable or unavoidable, according to Philip Patton, founder of the Gold Standard Institute. In fact, more and more countries are demanding payment for their products in gold or tangible goods, and not in paper money with no other backing than the confidence that is being lost. Many economists believe that the old fiat system is set to collapse because it is prone to infinite inflation, as confidence in it is undermined when people realize that paper money is a derivative asset that has no real value and tangible assets do. As tangible assets do, I mean. According to Patton, when all paper currencies collapse at the same time, not only does money collapse, but the validity of the issuing authority will surely collapse as well. For the first time in recorded history, this collapse will call into question the credibility of governments as organizers of the money supply. Patton doesn't believe there is room for central bank under a free money system, because its only role is to manipulate interest rates, and interest rates should be a product of the free market, determined by free people, by people who actually grant and take loans, and by no one else. In this view, if gold becomes a stable measure of value, there could be no revaluation of gold. What are you going to revalue it against? Paper? Definition. The gold standard is a fixed monetary regime under which government currency is fixed and can be freely converted into gold. It can also refer to a freely competitive monetary system in which gold or bank receipts for gold act as the primary medium of exchange, or to an international trading standard in which some or all countries fix their exchange rate based on the relative parity values of gold between individual currencies. The gold standard is a monetary system that basically consists of setting the value of a country's currency in relation to the amount of gold it holds. The issuer of the currency guarantees that it can give the holder of its banknotes the amount of gold stated on them. An alternative would be the bimetallic standard, in which the currency would be backed by one part gold and one part silver. At the national level, each country based its amount of money in circulation directly on the amount of gold it had in its reserves. The mode of operation, therefore, consisted in the free import and export of gold to balance its balance of payments, making gold a monetary base by nature. Through the international movement of gold, this economic system seeks to establish fixed, stabilized international prices. Its calculation would be made by a rudimentary rule of three based on the price of gold at a given moment, that is, depending on the amount of gold for which each currency is exchanged in that period. Silver standard. Historically, the silver standard and bimetallism have been more common than the gold standard. The gold standard was the basis of the international monetary system from the 1870s until the early 1920s, and from the late 1920s until 1932, as well as from 1944 until 1971, when the US unilaterally ended the convertibility of the dollar to gold by foreign central banks, ending the Bretton Woods system. Historically, the gold standard began during the 19th century as the basis of the international financial system. It ended as a result of the First World War, since the belligerent governments needed to print a lot of fiat money to finance the war effort, without having the capacity to back that money in precious metal. During the Bretton Woods agreements, it was decided to adopt the dollar as the international currency, under the condition that the Federal Reserve would maintain the gold standard. But as of 1971, the gold standard was definitively broken. Therefore, the dollar became de facto fiat currency, backed by a government imposition with no intrinsic value, but with its own legal value. Austrian School. The main proponent of the gold standard is the Austrian School of Economics, which seems to have a crystal ball because they predicted the current crisis very accurately. It advocates the abolition of central banks and the monopoly of governments as the bodies in charge of minting legal tender, and completely unrelated to the gold standard. This school has been very influential for its criticism of Milton Friedman's Chicago School and the dominant Keynesian methodology. The Austrian School is an academy of heterodox economic thought that is based on methodological individualism. It is to say, the concept that social phenomena result from the motivations and actions of individuals. The Austrian School is characterized by its strong criticism of neoclassical, Marxist, Keynesian, and monetarist economic theories. While there are different views on economic policy that Austrians may hold, the Austrian school tends to define itself as the economic science of the free market. Business cycle. The Austrian theory of the business cycle explains the relationship between bank credit, economic growth, and massive investment mistakes that accumulate in the bull phase of the cycle, bursting with the bubble and destroying value. Exactly the same thing that is happening right now. They argue that an artificial expansion of credit, it is to say, not backed by prior voluntary savings and through downward manipulation of the interest rate, tends to increase investment and create a false economic boom, since relative prices have been distorted by the greater mass of money circulating in the economy. These investments, which wouldn't have been undertaken had it not been for the aforementioned distortion, overutilized the accumulated capital assets, diverting them to unprofitable projects, and sooner or later will produce overevaluations in some asset or assets. Such bubbles inevitably burst. When the issuance of new fiat media ceases, artificially low interest rates settle at their true market level, generally much higher than that set by central banks given the scarcity of capital goods. This abruptly cuts off the blow of cheap credit, and investments that seem profitable at inflated price now cease to be so. The crisis erupts and the liquidation of the erroneous investments takes place. Metallism. Ballionism, from ballion or gold ingot, is an economic doctrine that defines wealth as the amount of precious metals owned. Its practice was based on the accumulation of precious metals, coins or ingots, as the only possible wealth. It is also known as metallism. It can also be considered as defining a strictly metallic monetary system, which doesn't allow the issuing bank to issue paper money freely, but which faithfully reflects the existence in precious metal that supports it and thus prevents inflation. In its first meaning, it is identified with the economic policy of the Hispanic monarchy during the ancient regime, especially by the Habsburgs, 16th and 17th centuries, through their regulatory obsession and control over the precious metals extracted from Americas in plural. Their accumulation was sought by identifying wealth and the existence of gold or silver, which were associated with prestige and power. They tried to prevent the outflow of gold or silver, which further contributed to the inflation process known as price revolution. Some of the Spanish economists of the time, grouped under the name of arbitrism, can be considered ballionists. Universal currency. The doubloon was a Spanish gold coin that was equivalent to 2 escudos or 32 reales and weighed 6.77 grams. It was originally so called because it represented a value equal to that of 2 excellent gold coins. The currency introduced in Spain in 1497 by the Catholic monarchs, but later the name of doubloon was assigned to practically all gold coins minted in the Spanish Empire that were equal to or greater in value than 2 escudos. Thus, there was the doblón de a cuatro, a piece of 4, equal to 4 escudos, weighing 13.5 grams, or the piece of 8, doblón de a 8, equivalent to 8 escudos weighing 27 grams. Doubloons were minted in Spain, New Spain, Peru, and New Granada. The term doubloon was first used to describe the gold doubloon, possibly because it was worth 2 ducats, or because of the double portrait of the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella. In Spain, doubloons were legal tender until the mid-19th century. In 1859, Isabella II replaced the escudo with the reales as the basis for the doubloon. She also replaced the 6.77 gram doubloon with a new heavier one that was equivalent to 100 reales and weighed more than 80 grams. The last Spain doubloons, indicating the denomination of 80 reales, were minted in 1849. The Spanish territories of Mexico, Peru, and New Granada continued to mint doubloons after independence. During the period of the Austrians and the Bourbons until the Revolution of 1878, the representative units were the maravedí, the real, and the escudo, depending on the metal used. The first known American gold pieces date from 1627, specifically doubloons, 2 shields, of the mint of the new Kingdom of Granada, currently Colombia. The piece of 8, or real de ocho. The piece of 8, or carolus, in Latin, peso de ocho, peso fuerte o peso duro, known in the English-speaking world as the Spanish dollar, is a silver coin worth 8 reales minted by the Catholic monarchy after the monetary reform of 1497 that established the Spanish real. Thanks to its wide use at the end of the 18th century in Europe, all America, and the Far East, it became the first currency in worldwide use. It was the first legal tender in the US until an 1857 law disallowed its use. Many current currencies took their respective denominations from their piece of 8, such as the dollar, the yuan, or the Mexican peso. In the English-speaking world, the piece of 8 was generally known as the Spanish dollar, or 8 real coin. There are various theories that the symbol of the S symbol of the peso and the dollar has its origin in the bands and columns of Hercules of the Strait of Gibraltar of the Spanish coat of arms that appears on the reverse of the piece of 8. The 19th century, which is commonly thought as the gold standard, was not a true gold standard, as it had a large fiat content. About 60% of the paper was not backed by gold. That is not a gold standard, but a paper standard. That was a much better system than the one we have today, but nevertheless, it is not a pure gold standard. The gold standard was a monetary system that guaranteed paper money until it ceased to be used in 1971, following the declaration of the inconvertibility of the dollar into gold made by President Nixon on Sunday, August 15, 1971, overwhelmed by the expense of the Vietnam War. The declaration rendered ineffective the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement that had established a new world economic order that lasted until 1970. This decision has had consequences in the disappearance of commodity money, supported by a fixed value such as gold, and the creation of fiat money that was based on the trust of society in the issuer made a promise to pay. Other consequences were imbalances in the international monetary system and a greater margin from central banks to print money as they saw fit. Today, we are facing a very similar situation, and even paradoxical, since central banks are acquiring not only gold but even palladium in the face of geopolitical and monetary instability, and moreover, in recent years they have managed to lower the price of gold in order to acquire it at a lower cost and therefore obtain a greater quantity. Gold and palladium are two fundamental metals in alchemy, in addition to silver. Reserves. Gold reserves are held by central banks as stores of value. List of the top of 20 countries with gold reserves, with the Vatican being the country with the most gold of the planet, with 60,350 tons. The countries and institutions with the largest reserves in tons of gold are the US, Germany, IMF, Italy, France, Russia, China, Switzerland, Japan, India, Netherlands, European Central Bank, Taiwan, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Portugal, Uzbekistan, Saudi Arabia, United Kingdom, Lebanon, Spain and Austria. But Spain is only number 20 in the ranking because past governments sold some of the Bank of Spain's gold instead of buying more gold in order to prepare for the storm. The Bank of Spain held some 283 tons in 2019 that are deposited in its own vaults and in different entities in London and New York. In 2004, the total reserve of this metal amounted to about 70 million troy ounces. In 2005, it ended with 14.7 million. In 2006, with 13.4 million. And in December 2007, after the sale of a large part of the reserves, with the current reserve of 9.05 million troy ounces, equivalent to 281.5 tons of gold. According to IMF data, Spain ranks 20th among the 40 largest gold reserves in the world. Transmutation. Archangel Michael's message to lightworkers. Much of what has occurred in Ukraine is now over. Final arrangements are being made to leave Russian forces in the country to secure this parcel of land and continue to free the people from the oppression of the dark side. More arrests are being made. Now, what is necessary is the transmutation of the energies within the Ukrainian area, as these energies are very dense. We ask if you would be inspired to transmute these energies with the violet flame. It's not difficult. Simply see yourself as the violet flame of God, turn your image into a violet flame, and then send your energies to Ukraine. We must bring this area out of its density, otherwise we risk losing it again to the occult forces. Another message from Archangel Michael. Knowing the future, it is not important for anyone's spiritual growth. It's only relevant to those who have not done the work, who have not purged themselves of malignancies, dark thoughts and actions. Those who are not focused on the light. These are the only ones who need that kind of information, which means that you and your lightworker friends should have no worries, for no matter how it unfolds, they are hurt and will be taken care of. I realize that it has been very difficult for lightworkers. You have had difficulties all your lives. You have used your shields and protected yourselves as much as possible, but many arrows pierced your hearts. Those with closed hearts and minds felt threatened by your willingness to step out of the norm, your curiosity and your bravery. They were jealous, so they mocked you and ridiculed you. I say to all of you, congratulations for standing your ground. Even if this cruel treatment shut you up, you still stood your ground and continued your search for truth, light and spiritual knowledge. You were true to your soul. Thanks a lot, dear friends.